colleague from Alabama. And let me begin by stating that I've had the opportunity to speak with Jake Lew in my office on several occasions. It's very clear to me that Jake Lew is a very intelligent person. He's a very serious man, and I applaud his many, many years of public service to our country. Furthermore, I believe that this afternoon he will be confirmed by the U.S. Senate, but I have to say that he will not be confirmed with my vote. And the reason for that, Mr. President, is that at this particular moment in American history, we find ourselves in the most difficult economic moment since the Great Depression. The reality is, and we don't talk about it too much, the media doesn't talk about it too much, but most people understand that the great middle class of this country is disappearing. Poverty is extraordinarily high, over 46 million Americans living in poverty. And at the same time, while the middle class collapses and poverty is extraordinarily high, the wealthiest people in this country are doing phenomenally well, and we are seeing record-breaking profits for large corporations. So the question is, given the fact that the Secretary of Treasury is one of the very most important positions in our government, having enormous powers unto himself, in addition to being a key advisor to the President, the question is the new Secretary of Treasury prepared to take on the increasingly powerful oligarchy that controls the economic and political life of our nation and stand with the working families of America who are being battered and beaten up every single day? And I do not believe that by any stretch of the imagination that Jake Lew is that person. Mr. President, this is the economic reality that we are confronting today, and this is the economic reality that we need a Secretary of Treasury to work with the American people on improving. We have the most unequal distribution of wealth and income of any major country on earth, worse than at any time since before the Great Depression. Today, the wealthiest 400 Americans own more wealth than the bottom half of America, 150 million people. 400, 150. Do I believe that Jake Lew sees this as a serious problem that he is going to address? I do not. Today, one family, the Walton family, one of the major welfare beneficiaries of America, because they pay their workers so low wages and provide such poor benefits that many of their workers are on Medicaid, food stamps, assisted housing, and yet that one family owns more wealth than the bottom 40% of American families. Do I believe that Jake Lew is going to say, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense, we've got to change those policies? No, I do not. Today, the top 1% owns 38% of the wealth in America, which is incredible unto itself. But even more incredible is the bottom 60% own less than 3% of the nation's wealth. This is not only a moral issue, it is not only an economic issue, because when you have that kind of wealth and income disparity, working families are not going to have the money they spend to buy goods and services to create jobs. It is also a political crisis, because as a result of Citizens United, this 1% can now spend unlimited sums of money to elect those candidates who support their agenda and to create terror on the floor of the Senate on the part of any member who's going to vote against their interests. Gee, should I vote to deal with the greed on Wall Street if Wall Street is going to pour millions of dollars against me in my re-election campaign? Do I believe that Jake Lew, as Secretary of Treasury, is going to begin to address the issues of income inequality and wealth inequality in this country? Not for a second do I believe that he will do that. Mr. President, while the wealthiest people are doing phenomenally well, the Federal Reserve reported last year that median net worth for middle-class families dropped by nearly 40% from 2007 to 2010. Can you believe that? Dropped by 40%. That is the equivalent of wiping out 18 years of savings for the average middle-class family. Now, this is even more incredible, and it is absolutely important, and I get tired of being one of the very few people up here who talks about it. I hope there will be some other senators who talk about what is, in fact, one of the major issues facing this country, income and wealth inequality. In terms of income, here is a fact that is literally beyond comprehension. The last study on this subject showed that from 2009 through 2011, 100% of all new income went to the top 1%. All of the new income generated went to the top 1%, while the bottom 99%, those include some pretty wealthy people, actually saw a loss in their income. And what that tells us is that it doesn't almost matter. Economic growth now is obviously low. It's not as high as we wanted, but it almost doesn't matter, because all of the new income generated by this economic growth is going to go to the top 1%. Do I think that this is an issue that Jake Lew is going to address? No, unfortunately, I don't. Mr. President, real unemployment in this country is not what the papers report at 7.8 or 7.9%. Real unemployment is over 14% if we count those people who have given up looking for work or working part-time when they want to work full-time. Some 23 million people. Have I heard one word from Jake Lew about the need to come up with programs to put millions of people back to work immediately, including the young people whose unemployment rate is higher than the general public, or people of color who are also economically suffering? I have not. Mr. President, millions of people are still underwater on their mortgages, and millions more have seen the American dream of home ownership turn into a nightmare of foreclosure. Now, the next Secretary of Treasury will be facing enormous challenges. Let me mention just a few. The next Secretary of the Treasury will play a central role in regulating and overseeing Wall Street and large financial institutions. Let us never forget that as a result of the greed, recklessness, and illegal behavior on Wall Street, millions of Americans lost their jobs, their homes, their life savings, and their ability to send their kids to college, all attributable to the greed and recklessness and illegal behavior on Wall Street. We need a Secretary of Treasury who does not come from Wall Street, but is prepared to stand up to the enormous power of Wall Street. We need a Treasury Secretary who will end the current business model, which is operating the largest gambling casino this world has ever seen, and demand that Wall Street start investing in the productive economy, where businesses actually produce real goods and services and create jobs. Do I believe that Jake Lew is going to be doing that? No, Mr. President, I do not. Mr. President, in my view, we need a Secretary of the Treasury who will understand that when the largest banks in this country have become even larger, it is time to break them up. Do I believe that Jake Lew will work to break up these huge financial conglomerates? No, I do not. Mr. President, today, the 10 largest banks in America are bigger than they were before the financial crisis began. Now, you maybe remember that we bailed out Wall Street because they were too big to fail. That if these banks went under, they would take a significant part of the American and world's economy with them, and the taxpayers of this country had to bail them out. And now we find that every single one of the top 10 financial institutions today are larger than they were when we bailed them out some years ago because they were too big to fail. Today, the 6 largest financial institutions in this country, J.P. Morgan Chase, Bank of America, Citigroup, Wells Fargo, Goldman Sachs, and MetLife, have assets equal to 2/3 of the GDP of this country, over $9.6 trillion. 6 financial institutions have assets equal to 2/3 of the GDP of the United States of America. These 6 financial institutions issue 2/3 of all of the credit cards, half of all of the mortgages. They control 95% of all derivatives and hold nearly 40% of all bank deposits in this country. Do I think this issue, this concern, is something that Jake Lew will address? Not in a million years. While millions of Americans continue to struggle through the worst economic crisis since the 1930s, Wall Street is doing today phenomenally well. We bailed them out. They caused the recession. We bailed them out, and now they are doing phenomenally well. Financial institutions made over $143 billion in profits in 2012, the most profitable year on record, with the exception of 2006, just before the economic meltdown. Incredibly, the financial industry now makes almost half of all non-farm corporate profits in the United States, up from just about 10% in 1947. As someone who has worked hard to elect Barack Obama on 2 occasions, I remain extremely concerned that virtually all of his key economic advisors have come from Wall Street, and Jake Lew is no exception to that. And let me be clear, it is not just because Mr. Lew served as a chief operating officer at Citigroup during the financial crisis. It is not just because Citigroup awarded Mr. Lew a $940,000 bonus as he was leaving to join the State Department. It is not just because Citigroup received a total of $2.5 trillion in virtually zero-interest loans from the Fed, or that the Treasury Department provided Citigroup with a bailout of more than $45 billion during Mr. Lew's tenure at Citigroup. I am opposed to Mr. Lew's nomination because of the views he now holds about Wall Street and the financial bailout. On September 22, 2010, when I asked Mr. Lew at a Budget Committee hearing if he believed that deregulation of Wall Street significantly caused the financial crisis, something that almost all economists agree with, here is what he said, and I quote, "I don't believe that deregulation was the proximate cause. I would defer to others who are more expert about the industry to parse it better than that," end of quote. And at his confirmation hearing earlier this month, Mr. Lew called the Glass-Steagall Act, quote, unquote, anachronistic, end of quote, and said that the Dodd-Frank Act had, quote, unquote, effectively dealt with the issue of too big to fail. And I couldn't disagree more. Mr. President, in my view, we don't need another Treasury Secretary who thinks that the deregulation of Wall Street did not significantly contribute to the financial crisis. We need someone who will stand up to these huge financial institutions and, on behalf of the American people, small businesses, working families, say enough is enough to Wall Street. You cannot continue to operate the way you are. Mr. President, The next Treasury Secretary will be the lead negotiator for the President on how to reduce the deficit, an issue that we are all concerned about. And here is the issue. Do we balance the budget by cutting Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, education, nutrition, and programs that middle-income and working families depend upon? You can do it that way. Paul Ryan, the chairman of the House Budget Committee, will come up with that proposal, and it will mean huge suffering for tens and tens of millions of families who are already hurting. That is one way you can do deficit reduction. But I think that that approach is, first of all, way out of touch with what the American people want. The American people have been very clear. They do not want cuts in Social Security. They do not want to cut veterans programs, do not want to cut Medicare or Medicaid. But the American people have also been clear that at a time when the wealthiest people and largest corporations are doing phenomenally well, and when their effective tax rates are the lowest in decades, when they enjoy huge loopholes that enable them to avoid paying their fair share in taxes, what the American people say, you know what, those guys have got to start paying their fair share. Now, all of us will remember a few years ago when Wall Street was on the verge of collapse because of their greed and recklessness. They came crawling to the Congress and the taxpayers of America and said, we are Americans, we love America, bail us out. And Congress, against my vote, bailed them out. But now these same corporations who told us how much they love America are not only shipping our jobs to China and other countries, they are stashing their profits in the Cayman Islands, Bermuda, other tax havens, and avoiding their responsibility as taxpayers. Offshore tax schemes have become so absurd that one 5-story office building in the Cayman Islands is now the home to more than 18,000 corporations. One building. And everybody knows what that is about. All that is a mail drop for corporations. They don't exist there. They're just using that address as a means to avoid paying taxes to the United States and other countries. And let me just give you a few examples of some of these large corporations and what they have done to avoid paying American taxes at a time when revenue today, as a percentage of GDP, is almost the lowest that it has been in decades. So the choice is, do you cut Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, or do you ask enormously profitable corporations to stop using loopholes to avoid paying taxes? Just a few examples. I can give you many. In 2010, the Bank of America, one of the largest financial institutions in this country, an institution bailed out by the working families of this country when they were on the verge of collapse, the Bank of America set up more than 200 subsidiaries in the Cayman Islands, which, by the way, has a corporate tax rate of 0, to avoid paying U.S. taxes. How's that? You bail them out, they run to the Cayman Islands, set up 200 separate subsidiaries in order to avoid paying taxes to America. It is time for Congress, it is time for a Secretary of Treasury to address that issue. Do I think in a million years Jake Lew is prepared to do that? No, I don't. We need a Secretary of Treasury who will do that. Not only did the Bank of America pay nothing in federal income taxes, but it received a rebate. This is in 2010. It received a rebate from the IRS worth $1.9 billion that year. All right? Pay nothing in taxes, enormously profitable, bailed out by the American people, and then they get a rebate from the IRS for almost $2 billion. And then people say, oh, we don't have enough revenue. We got to cut Social Security. We got to cut nutrition programs for hungry children. And yet, when one of the largest financial institutions in the country gets a rebate, doesn't pay any taxes, for some of my colleagues, that's okay. In 2010, J.P. Morgan Chase operated 83 separate subsidiaries incorporated in offshore tax havens to avoid paying some $4.9 billion in U.S. taxes. That same year, Goldman Sachs operated 39 subsidiaries in offshore tax havens to avoid an estimated $3.3 billion in U.S. taxes. Citigroup, where Mr. Lew actually worked, has paid no federal income taxes for the last 4 years after establishing 25 subsidiaries in offshore tax havens. And on and on and on it goes. Wall Street bailed out by American workers. Wall Street causing the recession. Now they're enormously profitable. Now the CEOs make huge compensation packages. But when it comes to paying their taxes, suddenly they love the Cayman Islands. So my suggestion is that the next time these crooks destroy their banks and need to be bailed out, let them go to the government of the Cayman Islands to get their bailout and not the taxpayers of the United States of America. Mr. President, let me just conclude by talking about trade for a moment, because the Secretary of the Treasury gets involved heavily in the trade issues. And trade is not a sexy issue, but it is an enormously important issue. And I think it's important for all of us to understand that our current unfettered free trade policy has been an unmitigated disaster for the working people of this country. Last year, our trade deficit was more than $540 billion. Permanent normal trade relations with China. You remember that when they came, oh my goodness, we're going to open up the Chinese market. We're going to create all kinds of jobs in the United States. We're going to sell all of our products to the large population in China. Well, not quite. Not quite. PNTR with China has led to the loss of nearly 3 million American jobs, and the NAFTA agreement has led to the loss of nearly 1 million American jobs as large multinationals continue to throw American workers out on the street and move to China, Mexico, and other countries where workers are paid pennies an hour. In 2008, I supported then-Senator Barack Obama when he told the AFL-CIO in Philadelphia the following. Barack Obama, 2008, candidate for President of the United States. Quote, "What I refuse to accept is that we have to sign trade deals like the South Korea agreement that are bad for American workers. What I oppose and what I've always opposed are trade deals that put the interest of multinational corporations ahead of the interest of American workers, like NAFTA and CAFTA and permanent normal trade relations with China. And I'll also oppose the Colombia Free Trade Agreement if President Bush insists on sending it to Congress, because the violence against unions in Colombia would make a mockery of the very labor protections that we have insisted be included in these kinds of agreements. So you can trust me when I say that whatever trade deals we negotiate when I'm president will be good for American workers, and they'll have strong labor and environmental protections that we'll enforce." End of quote. Barack Obama, candidate for president 2008. Unfortunately, as President Obama signed those bad trade deals into law while Mr. Lew was director of the Office of Management and Budget. As a result, more American jobs have been lost, and our trade deficits with all of those countries have gone up. So in my view, we need a Secretary of Treasury who will work to fundamentally rewrite our trade policies to ensure that American jobs are no longer our #1 export. Do I believe that Jake Lew will be that person? Not a chance. So let me conclude, Mr. President, by simply saying this. This country faces the most difficult economic times since the Great Depression. Tens of millions of working families, seniors, children are struggling every single day to keep their heads above water, while the wealthiest people are doing phenomenally well, and large multinational corporations are enjoying record-breaking profits. And because of all of the money that Wall Street and these large, profitable corporations have, they are investing in the political process, putting huge amounts of money, hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars, to elect candidates who represent their interests and not the interest of the average American. Now is the time to have people in the Obama administration who are going to stand with the American people, stand with workers, stand with seniors, and have the courage to take on the big money interests who are causing so many problems for our nation. In my view, Jack Lew is not that person, and I will vote against him becoming our next Secretary of Treasury. And with that, Mr. President, I yield the floor.